Hello and welcome. No one really knows.
His first tattoo ever.
Mhm.
And like that happened like kind of after hours, and that was really cool to see. But just seeing those two legends get together and like having you help, and I think immediately had a rapport, like, because we're both very interested in the arts and learning about art and kind of keeping ourselves open to that. I want in a design, I feel like, but at the same time, they did like encourage me to draw and make art as a kid.
Mhm.
They took me to museums, so in that sense, I think they fostered a sense of art and also a sense of like education. I was very lucky when I initially learned to tattoo from Paco Excel and Adrian Lee. At that time, they had New School Studios here in San Jose. Paco's now doing Death Before Dishonor. Adrian has Analog.
Mhm.
Both of those guys are like powerhouses in the tattoo world, and as you know, they're both like super driven artists,
Right.
and more so than I am. I think like even looking at your toy collection there and how much you've painted there, I feel like a lazy artist because I feel like sometimes like my time gets split. Like I draw for my clients, but I don't paint as much as like some of my friends do. Like,
Mhm.
like Chris Brand is always painting and sculpting. My buddy Tyler is always painting and like, but I think like it's partly because I'm doing stuff like, a convention or book projects or museum projects. I think sometimes like, I mean, as long as it's creative, I think it's okay.
Mhm.
But like that is something I think, but so anyhow, I got to learn from these like two amazing artists. And then early on, I went to Japan to get my back piece done by Horiyoshi 3. And for 10 years, I was an apprentice of his.
Mhm.
And, the Japanese learning structure is very specific. It involves a lot of repetition, a lot of ingrained learning, a lot of humbling yourself. Like I remember at the beginning, I was told, like, you need to trace my designs. You need to trace Hokusai's designs. And, in my youthful arrogance, I was like, but I'm an artist. I don't trace things. And he was like laughing at me like, what, are you too good? You think you're better than Hokusai? And I mean, I think there's a really good point there because like when you learn Japanese calligraphy, you do the same stroke over and over and over again. Like it's such a repetitive thing, and like that's kind of like I don't care what it is, if you're making sushi, if you're doing calligraphy, if you're painting. In Japan, there's a lot of repetition, and not just Japan. Like if you look at like any great European painter, like even abstract, modern, whatever cubist style, I guarantee you if you go back to their sketchbooks from the early years, they're doing figure drawing, like they're doing the practice stuff, like they're getting their chops down, you know what I mean? And I feel like when I look at tattooers that I really like, I think the people that are making like really amazing work, they might be doing abstract, they might be kind of bending, breaking, whatever with the rules, but there's at some point there's a solid foundation. I think we all learn like certain things, and then from there you decide where you're going to take that. And for me, I think right now, after 20 years, finally, I feel like I finally know where I want to be. I think the first 10 years of my career, I was trying to be my master, which I don't think is a bad thing. I'm not ashamed of that. He's an amazing tattooer. He's an amazing person. That was a great role model. But I think artistically too, like you sort of have to find and create your own world, and that's going to be based on you and your experiences, and I'm just grateful to like it's, I mean, almost 2 decades of this basically, and I'm really appreciative of all the help I've gotten. Like you gave me some praise earlier, and I appreciate that, but at the same time, like I had amazing role models like Ed Hardy. Like I was lucky to get guys like Ed Hardy helping me out early on, get somebody like Grimy, or obviously like everyone in Japan, like it's kind of like I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. So you kind of, what I mean? Like it's not so much, you as like the support system you have. And I also think that's important, like with people, like maybe not just in art, but, in general, like I brought up Chris Brand earlier, for example, who I think is such an inspiration. Like I feel like such a weak ass artist when I see Chris, I mean? And Chris is the kind of guy like, you're sitting there watching a movie, but he's doodling on a sketch pad at the same time. I mean, like he just exudes art. But if you look at him and his like Uglar Works crew, like he's surrounded himself with these like-minded people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like in life in general, like if you want to accomplish certain things, like you need to be around people that are on the same page. Like you can't be around people that don't have that same goal. Like you want people, I think State of Grace is actually 15 years old now, and I think that's been a constant challenge for us, is to assemble a crew that, like, you know, will provide like a. That's my wife.
Knives and needles.
But assemble a crew that, you know, it inspires and work. You know, it's a mixture of working well together, having fun, because, you know, like, it's work, but you want it to be fun. It's a tattoo shop. You know, I mean, we don't work in offices here.
Right.
You know, like, we want to have a good time. We want our clients to have a good time, and I also feel that, like, you know, I hope that people that work here feel that they have a pretty free work environment, just because I feel like happy artists are better artists.
Yeah.
Like, we're not like. This isn't like, you know, some grind where you go to a cubicle. It's like, all right, you put in a 12-hour day and you show me some numbers kind of thing. You know, it's like, I remember when Marcus Pacheco, you're probably too young for this, and I'm not trying to be like I'm the old guy, because I'm not really that old yet.
That's how we learn.
But he had Primal Urge in San Francisco, right? Like, he put everyone on Space Rent. You know, I met him, I think at the time, like, Tim Lehigh and Grimy were working there. You know, I didn't really know Marcus too well at the time, but when I saw the shop, I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. But his whole concept I thought was even cooler, was that he set it up on a space rent system to where he was like, everyone can just do one tattoo a day, just make it a good one. Like, it wasn't so much like a money driven thing, you know. And I'll be honest, like, I think one thing that's nice about tattooing, and you know, it's great to see a lot of your peers succeed, is that I think, it is a field where a lot of people that do great work are doing well, you know? And I think, sadly, like, in other fields of art, like, let's say you're a painter, you could be an amazing painter, but you might not achieve, like, you know, any, like, you know, basically you might not be able to support yourself until you're dead, right? Like, you might have to wash dishes during the day. And on one level, it's like, that's great, because if you love it, you'll do it. You know, like, I think that was one thing too. Like, when we first started getting into tattooing, like, the big thing was to discourage other people from becoming tattooers.
Right. And
it wasn't like hating on them or being mean. It was just more like, well, do you have what it takes? You know, like, I remember when I first started, I did my first tattoo in January of 1998. I apprenticed in 97. So I'm not, you know, like I said, I'm not that old. I started getting tattooed in 1991. But in the late 90s, whenever you talk to older tattooers, they'd be like, oh, when is this tattoo boom going to end? When is it going to end? And they didn't realize the boom hadn't even started. I mean, this is pre-Miami Ink. This is pre-everything, like, you know, before the tattoo world just exploded. And it's, I mean, it's like like we're doing podcasts now. I mean, there weren't even podcasts existing back then. People were barely using the internet. You know what I mean? Like, so it's all this stuff is like so much, like, it's a lot, you know? I mean, okay, you're going to laugh because you know what I did yesterday?
Go for it.
And this is totally because working at my shop, I've seen 3 of my guys. I bought an iPad Pro, you know? And, like, I know there's certain friends of mine that are giving me crap about it. But, you know, at the same time, like, I'm sitting here like, you know, like, I got to take a flight on Thursday. I'm going to be in an airplane for 6 hours. And, you know what I mean? I can actually get drawings done over there.
Well, you know, like, so the funny thing is that I'll start with the iPad thing, because you made quite a few points that I really want to ask you about. And it's like, you know, the iPad thing, you have that one Instagram page. I think it's called Tattoo something. It's like a meme page about tattoo artists to tattoo artists.
Dang tattoo memes.
Dang tattoo memes. Thank you. It's hilarious. Yeah. And it's funny because, you know, most people are like, I swear to God, these people are watching us in this shop, because we go through so much of that stuff. But, you know, the iPad thing is really interesting, because I had this conversation with Joe Capobianco about it and how he felt. And, you know, we were both kind of talking about the old school versus new school. And the reality of it is you're right. At the end of the day, nothing beats a physical medium. But in art, there's always progression. You know, people look at Michelangelo and Michelangelo, Caravaggio, and all these guys, Da Vinci, and everyone considers them to be a pantheon of the best artists that were ever around. The problem is that at their time, they were using old techniques to create new techniques and technology for their time to create art. And all the snobs back then were like, you can't do that. That's not the old school way. But yet that's normal to us. Yeah. Everything progresses. It's you that has to figure out whether you want to. Now, I find the importance of like hand lettering and sign making. I find that to be something that needs to always be physical and kept, but digital doesn't hurt. But digital only hurts if you're trying to eradicate the idea of physical. But digital doesn't actually hurt anybody if you have someone like Gary from Norm's crew. Like that guy does just his name, and it's really clean work. But if you see him on digital, or Kincaid or any of these guys, them on digital, the technique has been practiced years and years and years. So I feel like if you're on an iPad, it is way different than somebody who is starting off, let's say tattooing wise as an apprentice, and never picks up a red or a blue pencil, you know. But I want to start off with the first off fact. Thank you for making the time, and also tell your wife I said hello because I saw her in the back and waved hi.
We're in the back room of the shop. Hold on, wait. My dog. I gotta grab. My dog's stuck on one of these chairs.
For anyone that can't see there, he has both of his pups hanging out, and I love these dogs.
He got himself stuck on one of the chairs, but no, but the iPad thing is interesting because okay, so first off, I'll say this though, like with the dank tattoo memes, those are hilarious because I think we can all relate, like when they have like the frustrating customer ones, but then they're even funnier when they're making fun and then you realize it's you. You know what I mean? Like, and they just nail it, right? Like, and like, so, I mean, that's actually like, it's a really funny Instagram. But you know, one thing that's funny because like the iPad thing, like, because actually they said something about loyal to the coil. Oh, tell me more about drawing on an iPad, you know?
Yeah.
And like, you know, and I think that's funny already. But like the funny thing about that with the machine debate is that, you know, as a Japanese that I try to do some Tabori here and there, but it's just I haven't implemented it into my daily work the way that Horitomo or Horifuji has.
Right.
And I'll be honest, because it's hard. Like it's, you know, like I give the analogy of like, look, if you had a motorcycle and then one day I was like, here's a bicycle and you got to go from point A to point B, you can still get there. It's just going to take you longer. And I think for me, that's like, you know, one of those things is like, I think there's an importance to Tabori. I think there's an amazing look to it. But it also for you know, like when you're not fast at it, it's hard to kind of go that way. But so I guess my point with that was that like as a Japanese tattoo artist, like I don't feel like whether it's a coil machine or a rotary machine, it's not Tabori. So
right.
You know what I mean? Like I've already kind of like not sold out, but I'm already not doing that part of the tradition. I think a lot of what you're saying, I think it has to do with intention. Like, you know, like are you using like an iPad just so you can trace stuff, or are you using, you know, or is it just a new medium? Yes. Like it's easier instead of like, it's like let's say you're using a Sumi pen that has the little ink reservoir that you press rather than a block that you grind. That's just a matter of convenience. Right. Now a traditionalist could argue you're losing that bit of the culture and the bit of the ceremony of grinding your Sumi, you know, but at the end of the day, you're still painting like a brush. So I think it just comes down to like, you know, but like the other day, I was drawing this like a very small shishi head, and I kept thinking like, you know, I used like 8 pieces of paper, and I was like, you know, I mean, and I could have just cleaned it up. One thing I like about that I've seen the guys here do a lot is, you know, you'll take a picture of somebody, and then you can draw it to fit their body, then you erase the picture. Yes. Yeah, and stuff like that I think is actually, because you know as well as I do, like when you take a tracing with tracing paper, it never contours exactly, you know, and then some people do the contact film, and yeah, I'm just saying, like I think. I mean, one thing I remember Horitomo told me, because I was asking him, like, you know, well, do you think that you should tattoo like entirely by Tabori? Because there's guys out that outline by Tabori, and I think that's awesome. Right. But it's also, it won't allow you to get a certain look. Like your lines have to be a lot thicker, and then there's the time factor, you know. And one thing Horitomo said to me that I think, I'm not saying this is an excuse, but he was like, look, if you showed up in Japan in like 1850 with a tattoo machine and a power supply, they would use it. Yeah. It's like, you know, not to stereotype that, you know, Japanese love technology. They would totally rock that, you know, but they'd still do it their way. They'd still make their apprentices probably, you know, practice for 2 years. And then, you know, I mean, they'd still have those things. Right. And I think in essence, that's what's important. Like even, okay, for example, to segue, not segue, but just to bring up a point too about changing cultures, you know, like, as you know, like I curated the exhibit Tatao Marks of Polynesia, got to spend a lot of time with, you know, the Sulape family. I was in Samoa, interviewed the prime minister, the head of state, you know, like, and it was an amazing experience. Like, and right. I got to learn a lot about another culture. And I think that's one of the great things about tattooing is that we get to learn about each other's cultures and share cultures. And, I think it actually, I'm not trying to like act like we're saving the world or nothing, like it's funny because sometimes I feel like our jobs are completely useless, but then they're not, because
they're influential.
5,000-year-old mummy has tattoos, like they're cave paintings, like art has always been there. So, you know what I mean? Like maybe we're not dispensing food or like, medical aid or military support, but for whatever reason, societies have always needed some form of expression, right? So we fall into that. Mm-hmm. But what I was going to say is that, like, within the Samoan tattoo, like for the males, there's these things like you need to be able to fish, you need to be able to provide for your family. And I think like stuff like that, like if you look at it back then, that was a very literal meaning, like, but now I feel like that gathering fish can also be more like you get a job and you provide food, pay your mortgage, put food on the table. Like times change, mm-hmm. like we don't, like they used to take payment in like fine mats and things like that, and like now they're taking money in canned goods, and it's it's the same thing here where like the culture is changing because the times are changing. Mm-hmm. So I think as long as you keep that proper essence, and what that is going to depend on situation and time, but like I think like even here we're using Skype to do a podcast to talk about stuff from like hundreds of years ago. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Well, like going back to what you were saying, I was speaking with Jess Yen, and he was going with over everything on a previous episode, as well as when we were hanging out in person. Two different instances, the guy's a plethora of knowledge, and he's showing me exactly what you were saying, getting your sticks of ink and blending them with tea, blending them with water, and having the actual aesthetic of putting yourself through a physical medium and understanding why and how these things work, which when you can just make a tool that Ken Arc makes for the iPad or for Adobe, and you go in and it's just a quick little thing, And I think the biggest thing when it comes to technology, as well as culture, as well as progression, is that you're right. A lot of us aren't, doing as much as people in the military or people here and there. But in reality, if anyone's been tattooing long enough and tattoos in a very good shop, half the time your clients like you for you on top of your work. You speak to them, you become part of their family, you become ingrained into who they are, their cultures, their ideas. And more importantly is when you're traveling as much as you do, when you were doing the tattoo, well, I can't pronounce it. I'm sorry. The tatau.
Oh, tatau. Yeah.
Tatau. Yeah. Sorry. The tatau over on the islands. And then when you're going back and forth for work and with the books and so forth, technology helps because like your fellow artists at your shop, you're looking for convenience to have the time. Like how easy is it? Especially like I do watercolor. I do inks, I do so forth. And how easy is it to break out an iPad on a plane or on a car to do something? But you're right. The main thing people tend to forget is that if you had given people a rotary, if you had given people a coil machine, an iPad, whatever it may be, 200 years ago, they would have used it.
Oh, yeah.
The ideal and the thinking that somebody, because of the primitive quote unquote time that they were in, they would have stuck to it. But you're right, the discipline is still there. It's just how it's managed. The thing that I wanted to ask you was, you have two things that I wrote down, a few little things after what you're talking about, but the arrogance of being young and the old school versus the new school. Now, you said that you had been getting tattooed from 91 through January of 98 when you got your when you started tattooing. And how did you perceive the tattoo industry and tattooing as a culture back then versus now?
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, obviously it's drastically changed, as have I. In 1991, when I got my first tattoos, I was 17. Mm-hmm. And I was in high school, and literally there was two people in our high school that had tattoos, me and this other friend, and we grew up in the suburbs, so it was like punk rock kids. I got like this,
mohawk and all that,
whole thing on the side of my head, yeah. And then like I got some tribal right here, and I'm telling you, it's funny because people laugh, but it's like, man, that stuff was like cutting edge back then, But in the early 90s, it was more like if you saw someone with tattoos, you'd be like, hey, where'd you get your work? Like it was like you were really part of a very small community. Mm-hmm. And it's funny too because even with like the mohawk, like that's like it's like a really accepted haircut now, but like
back then it wasn't.
Construction workers wanted to fight you, like I saw this thing on Instagram where it said like, remember when punk was called Hey Faggot? And like if you had a mohawk and tattoos, like there you would actually be walking by and people like, hey faggot, like talking shit. Like
I remember sorry not to cut you off, but I remember in 94, 95, I had a 15-inch big old green mohawk. I thought I was tough shit, and of course every other time you'd walk somewhere or something, hey you fucking fag, you'll have to go suck some dick, and it's like you either had to fight or fight.
It's a very accepted, like you got the faux hawk and everything. Yep. And, that's cool, whatever. But like, but so I think also too, going into tattoo shops in the early 90s, like we were just quiet and scared because we were little kids, and generally speaking, like the owner would be like some grumpy old biker guy or ex-Navy guy, and you didn't want to piss him off because he'd whoop your ass, and then like I think when I started tattooing, it was still like, like I think a lot changed between the late 90s and early 2000s. Like maybe just like I feel like everything just became like out in the open really quickly. Mm-hmm. In Japan too, like in a 5-year span, it went from like, oh, there's only a couple street shops in Japan to like now there's magazines and conventions, and it just blew up, and I think nobody predicted how this was going to change. Mm-hmm. I think like right now, like it's funny because so the other day we were talking and we were kind of like I don't want to get into like talking shit on brand names or anything, but there's like. I remember the other day being like, remember when we were trying to use yellow in 1990 something? Like, man, that stuff, you could pound that in and be gone the next day. And like, or the browns were terrible. Like, and now it's like you buy amazing inks, right? You know what I mean? Like the only, like there's certain colors, the only good ink you could get is if you bought National Powder and made it yourself.
Yes.
And that actually brings us to another point too. Like the importance of these old traditions. Like, I made needles for like the first, I want to say 7 years of my career, maybe less. And then, we had other people making them, and then now we just buy them. Right.
Right.
And I'll be honest, like, I'm glad I know how to make needles. But I don't miss it. Like that shit was terrible, the flux, and it was disgusting, But I also respect when I hear a tattooer that still makes their own needles. I totally respect that. Like we still have to make our hand needles. Mm-hmm. Like we don't buy those, but obviously, like thanks to Black Claw, I'm not trying to do a product plug, but it's what I use. Yeah. Like they made sick needles, so it's like I'm good on the needle thing. Like it's like anybody. I feel like information back then was guarded, but not just in tattooing. I mean, nowadays you can look up anything on the internet. But like a starting out tattoo, and I don't want this to come off as bitter, because I'm not bitter. It's just the way the world is. But when you start out now, you can buy a great machine online. You can buy amazing needles. You can buy great inks right from the start. You still have to learn to draw. You still have to do all these things, and also too, maybe the competition's tougher too, So I think, I think like a lot of these changes, like, it's like, I don't know. I see a lot of amazing tattooing out there. I try not to focus on the negative. Like I try to see more like, as someone I've owned a shop for 15 years, tattooed for 20 years. I've been getting tattooed since 91. I've had a tattoo convention with my partner Roman for, this will be our 13th year. So we've seen a lot of stuff, and the level of tattooing out there is amazing. Like there's so many good tattooers. You can't even like keep up with it,
Right.
But back to like some of those old school principles, there are always going to be those clients that seek out, like you brought up the sign painters. Okay. Like, have you noticed it's a huge thing right now to have somebody like Cool Hand Ken or one of those awesome guys come do your sign. Yep. You know what I mean? Like when you could just go to Kinko's or go to Signs R Us or whatever and have one made, right?
Yeah.
But tons of people want that handmade look.
Right.
Same thing. At our convention, the Tabori guy and the Tatao guy always booked. You know what I mean? Like, everyone like wants to have that experience, and that for me was like I think a lot of what tattooing is for me is experience. It's not even so much the end result. Like I have I joke with people that I have 1.5 bodysuits because like I got my back done in 98 in Japan. I got a bunch of other tattoos, and then last year I got a Simone Tatao over it. I covered a large section, but it was more for the experience of doing it. I wanted to know there a few reasons. Like one, like it was being offered to me, and I wasn't gonna decline such an honor. Mm-hmm. If Tufunga Tatatao is like a master of tattoo in Samoan, but like if Suasulape Peter was gonna offer me that, I wasn't gonna say no. But I'm not gonna lie, like I had anxieties for 6 months about the pain, and like I'm 42, I'm 43 now. I did it when I was 42, but 7 days of tattooing at 42,
that hurts a lot.
It was like, it was pretty daunting, and but I made it through, and to me, like that's one of the most important, amazing experiences I've had in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and at the end of the day, like you can't take it with you when you go, right? Like, it's like I don't know. I think I always try to travel. Like I'm not really big on like I don't buy like expensive things or jewelry or stuff like that. Like what I mean, like car, whatever. I drive a 4Runner. Like I'd rather spend that money traveling and going places and seeing stuff, and so that when my number's up, I'll feel like I've lived.
Right, and that's the crazy thing. So the idea of today, like going to what you were saying about buying ink and making it and so forth, there were certain artists that I had met in Fresno where they were, East California is predominantly, not all artists, but I mean, I worked there long enough at a point in my career where they try to hold on to the ideals of old school tattooing and old school mentality, even all the way down to the inks, where it's like, well, if you don't know how to make an ink, if you don't know how to make a needle, then you're not a real tattooer. And they push that aesthetic of being this big badass, but then you look at their work and you're like, oof, well, I'm glad you can make ink. How about you learn how to tattoo? Now, that sounds kind of a dickish thing, but it also churns the other way to where you have these guys who now in the new way of doing it, it's like everything's convenient. You need T-Tech. You don't want to scrub tubes like, the nights and hours you'd have to spend with just scrubbing everything out and autoclaving, and then, oh, hey, what's this on my tube, or making needles or this and that. And they're like, well, I can just buy it and I can do it. There's two different spectrums of tattooers these days, and I should say three, because there's people that are in the center that are, like yourself. I consider you as to be someone in the center where you respect the old, you embrace the new, and I think that the main thing is that not only with that, as far as products and discipline, I think it's the idea that artists really beat themselves up these days of not being looked at as busy or as talented or driven as other artists are. So for an example, you would look at somebody like yourself and you're saying, well, you have your friend Jake, you said it was your friend that paints a lot.
I think I was like Tyler.
I'm sorry.
Chris.
It was Tyler. Yeah. So you're saying Tyler paints a lot, but on the opposite end, you're planning out conventions with Roman. Sure. You're printing books. You're helping out the Mon cats and doing all that stuff. And it's like you guys have this empire that you have in this little niche that helps encourage other artists out there. Like myself, majority of what I spend my money on are books. I love books. I love reading. And you guys were gracious enough that the podcast that never aired, the Pod Wars, because it was just a shit show. But we gave away those books, and we got emails, or I should say I got emails of people who were like, man, this book is great. Thank you so much. And I said, no, thank them. And I really, really see at what you're doing as an artist to help encourage others to be well advised of their culture, be well advised of technique and legacy. And all that time, people are looking at you as like, man, I wish I was there. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, you're looking at someone like Tyler. I'm like, man, I wish I could paint more. Man, I wish I could do this. And you said something earlier that makes perfect sense that people tend to forget, is that we're always going to be looking at what we should be doing or what we wish we could be doing. And that you said it off mic, if you get as good as you think you need to be, then you're probably not going to be in a good position. You're always trying to improve on yourself. Yeah. So with all that being said, from having to be a painter and doing all your stuff through your apprenticeship over the years to becoming a businessman, now to becoming an entrepreneur beyond the business side, how has that affected your tattooing? Like, how does that affected you as a person? Because as an artist, everybody always wants to, because now it's about building your brand. A lot of people need this brand image. Sure. And sometimes they worry more about the brand than they do about the art.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And I think that's one of those weird, like, catch-22 things. And it's also like that never-ending balance, because like sometimes I've had this honestly, like literally my whole career, because when I first went to Japan to get my back done, I've been going to Japan my whole life, but when I first went for tattoos, like that's when I actually ended up writing that summer I wrote the 70-page manuscript for the Bushido, my first book. So I was already kind of like into the book thing right from the start, like when I first started tattooing. And I've always kind of wrestled with, if I didn't do this, I'd have more time for drawing. So maybe I'd be a better artist, or if I didn't. And it's hard because like, but I also like, I'm not, like I think everybody is multifaceted. Mm-hmm. Like not only do these things keep me occupied, but I have multiple interests. It's not like I only am interested in tattooing. Like I love tattooing. Like everything I do is some way connected to tattooing, whether it's the convention or any of these like the Momon Cats brand is based off Horitomo's tattoo drawings, or like any book, every book I've done has been about tattoos, and we've tried to like make some of them fun, make some of them informative. In any case, I've tried to like make books that I think would better tattooing, right? Mm-hmm. But I think like if I didn't do those things, what if I just tattooed only? Maybe I'd be burnt out by now, right? Because I see that happening too. Like I had this conversation with a friend of mine the other day because we're both at like the 20-year mark, and 20 years of doing something, you can love it all you want, but some days are tiring, and I think there's that thing of constantly like, and I think that's why it's also like I like working here with like having new artists and like like obviously having Horitomo here is amazing because he's kind of like a resident master, but also like a lot of the younger guys, like I that totally drives me, like and I I'm learning from them too. It's funny because I apprenticed Colin Baker, God, it's been over 10 years, like maybe 12, 13 years ago, and I feel like I learned more from him now, like just seeing the way he does things, like, and he's not afraid to do anything, and like so I think we're constantly wrestling. Like I think a lot of artists, like you want to keep that font of creativity, and however you get that, like whatever it takes. We just had that guy Takashi guest spot here, and it's pretty rad. Like he goes, those fake rock walls. Yeah. He climbs one of those every morning, and that's like kind of his way to start the day. And I think that's awesome, And like there's certain people like. Like Luke Stewart, he does jujitsu, like, like, or whatever it is that your thing is, that keeps you grounded, that keeps you sane, because like, because as much as we love tattooing, it can also be very frustrating. Like, yeah. I mean, like when you can't get a drawing right, like you just want to kill yourself, you're sitting like, oh, like, or you're like drawing and the client's not feeling it. And then, you feel like a failure. And that's no one's fault. Like sometimes maybe you're just not the artist for them, like, but I think like that kind of like not self-hatred, but that desire to push yourself, get better is like we talked about. It's inherent, it's natural. And like for me, I will say this though, like I look at everything I do kind of the same, like a convention, a museum show, a book, a tattoo. You do your best at the time. You're kind of lost in the moment. But then you look back later and like, oh man, I could have done that. What I mean? Like I look at like my 2 museum shows. I'm very proud of the work I did with them. I'm very proud of the people I got to work with. I've been very lucky to be like surrounded by very talented people, to learn from them, to work with them. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, now that I've done 2 shows, I'm like, oh my God, I did that wrong, or I should have done this. And I'm sure you're feeling that way with every podcast you do. It's like
I'm feeling it right now.
Yeah, right. But everything we create, it's like a thing.
It is.
And that's just like a tattoo. Like that's not going to be your last tattoo. The next one you're going to make it better. Right.
Well, I mean, like for me, you're 120% right in the fact of that. I look back, I'll look back on this podcast. I'm like, I'm really coherent. Like you've heard me talk in person. I'm very, very punctual, whether it be with my time or my words. When I'm on mic, because I'm also monitoring like 50 things at once, I get nervous. So it takes me longer to say something, but then I'm like, shit, I could have said this, or damn, I could have talked about that. And it's a techniques podcast. And I noticed about 4 episodes ago, I haven't talked much about techniques, which is also my thing that I beat myself up about. But in reality, I'm in an amazing collective, a shop where I work with my best friends. They're 1,000 times better than myself, artistically, tattoo wise. I mean, in general, but it's also that I'm never going to be the best in the shop, and that's the good thing, because you're always having to achieve for something better. When you make a step, there are 2 steps ahead. Now, the fact that I'm in a good shop, what really kills me after 11 years in the industry, 3.5 tattooing myself, you're right. Some days are harder than others. And I started the podcast because like that, or like the video stuff, this is all the little stuff I like to do on the side. But in reality, speaking to you, speaking to Joe, speaking to Jess, speaking to all these different tattoo artists, is just like a convention where you sit there and you're listening to someone who is not part of your normal realm, not part of your normal day to day. And all of a sudden you're like, fuck, there's that fire. Okay, it's good for like the next 3 days. I got to work my ass off. And sometimes that's how people work. And I feel that people beat themselves up on the idea of that. You said it perfectly. If you draw and draw and draw and it doesn't work for somebody, do not feel like a failure because you're not that person's cup of tea. Understand the acceptance that you may not be someone's cup of tea. You know, you do a predominantly amount of Japanese work and you can do almost anything. But the thing is that if you, I'm sure you've gone through it where you've drawn something and you look at it and you're like, wow, I got it. I got it. And then someone looks at it and goes, well, you know, maybe that right there. And you're, yeah, exactly. That face you made right there where it's like, okay. And in your head, you're like, but I had it. Like I drew it. It's clean. And your theory's there. But the society itself, like 91 to 98, speaking of when the time frame you gave, people looked at tattoo artists, whether it was a pick 'em and stick 'em off the wall or whether it was something you hand drew, and you thought about it and you said, well, the tattoo artist knows best. Now you have a society where it's cool to get tattooed, and by the way, my friend got it upside down, so therefore I'm right. You're an asshole.
Yeah, I mean, we're living with Pinterest, we're living with Yelp, we're living with all these things. Like, I try to just do my thing,
right?
But I definitely think like there definitely will be people will come in and like sometimes, and this might sound snide and rude, and it probably is a little bit, but sometimes you'll get a client that's like really like difficult. Very difficult, and you'll almost be like, wow, that person wouldn't have been getting tattooed in the 90s. Like that is a product of now, like that entitlement, like I want my pumpkin spice latte and my tattoo like this and I want it right now and blah blah blah. You know, what do you mean you have to wait here? Like, you know, we've had people that like you guys, because most of our artists can't do, like, we do walk-ins when we can, you know, but like it's just the nature of the shop. We've been blessed with we've been busy, and like, but you'll get people like, well, you can't do it right now, I'm gonna go somewhere that's not busy. Or like, cool, have at it, you know.
The impression of your shop, for anyone that hasn't been to State of Grace, was, are you in Japantown?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not very familiar with that part of San Jose, Bay Area. But when I got there, I walked up and it was like this tiny little stairway that goes upstairs to a second floor, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna check it out. And it's just this giant floor plan, and it feels like a studio. It feels like everyone's busy, everyone's doing their thing. And Colin, right, the gentleman that always dressed to the nines, was that his name?
The tall guy.
Yeah. Yeah, he at his station he had a beautiful phoenix and he had some dragons, and then you had another guy who was behind a one of those foldable barriers. Yeah, and everyone was working, but everyone looked in their element. And to me, that is always comfortable, because when you're in a shop, I mean, I associate it with the people that I know in the shops I've worked at, to where I've worked at a shop when I was trying to learn a lot more about painting for 2 years, and people got along, but there was no camaraderie in that shop. There was no unity in that shop. So when you look at that, you're like, man, it's just a job. And when you go to a shop like yours, it reminds me of where I work at, because you're sitting around people, and if you said, hey man, look at this drawing I just did, what do you think? You know what? I'd change this, or I'd do that. And there's that idea of that when you walk into State of Grace, when you walk into certain shops like this, that you're trying to see everybody move together in a better way. And the sad part about it is that when you have people that come in and they're like, oh man, like, what do you mean I have to wait for 2 weeks, a month, a year, whatever the artist is booked out? Oh, well, you could get a bad review on Yelp. The only good thing that comes out of that, in my opinion, when you work in a shop that you have camaraderie, is that you all look at each other the same way when you give them that, look at this asshole kind of, you know what I mean?
Because we would never think that.
Oh, no, never. No,
but you know what's funny is, like, you say that, like, so I remember 2 years ago, or was it last year maybe, at the convention, you know, when we're doing the convention, I'm kind of constantly looking at social media just to answer questions and whatnot. and we got like this we got slammed on like this review, like I think it was a Facebook review, like the lowest, like 1 star, like this is the worst tattoo convention I've been to, there's no bands, it's only tattoos. And I was kind of like, yes, you know, like that's exactly how I, you know, like we're not, because it's like that's the whole thing, like, you know, you can feel however you want, but I also can too. Like that's the whole freedom thing, right? Like, you know, this is how we've set up our shop. But back to the whole standing on the shoulders of giants things. Like, my favorite shop that I ever saw was 222 in San Francisco, like Eddie Deutsch's shop. And I mean, partly because he just had the banging crew, like, you know, like Scott Sylvia, Jeff Rasher, you know, like Juan Puente. Like, I mean, he had this killer team set up, right? But it wasn't just that; it was like a big warehouse. So, you know, our shop is 3,000 square feet, right, the bulk of which is one room. But it was that whole thing and this feeling of this camaraderie. And that's not even like if you want to take it a step further, like I was not old enough to have ever gone to it. But like, you know, you look at Ed Hardy's Realistic in the 70s. Like he took that idea of like the Japanese private studio, melded it with because, you know, prior to that, it was like American street shops, which are awesome too in their own way. Right. Like, you know, like they all have their like time, place, continuum. But for us, like, kind of find that middle ground of being like a custom studio, but that's open to public, but one big room where everyone kind of like meshes. Like, you know, we always encourage each other to like show each other drawings, talk to stuff, and, you know, but also between our shop, everyone has very different styles. Like, I think, I mean, like a lot of people ask that, are you guys like predominantly like a Japanese tattoo shop? And it's like, well, everyone here does Japanese, but, you know, a lot of the guys do other stuff. There's myself, Horitomo Horifuji, we're solely doing Japanese work. But, you know, like between everyone, like Colin will do a tribal armband, he'll do script, he'll do whatever. I mean, that's part of like his versatility, I think, is amazing. But then there's other shops like I'm super impressed by, if you look at like Spider Murphy's, like Theo Mandel and Paul Dobelman and the crew, they've created an aesthetic. Like there's a Spider Murphy's look that they've made, you know, which is, I think, to me, it's very reminiscent of like Bob Wicks and like a lot of those badass old timers. And, you know, but they've made a look to where, and then you go to Europe and there's like people copying that look the same way. Like, you know, I remember like going to Japan and seeing this guy his work looked just like cartoons, you know, like, and it was like, but I mean that in a good way, like he was influenced by, like, not just copying, but like you know, like this was his role model, you know? Yeah,
like a Max Fletcher style, like the old 1920s to 40s. Or is that what you're referring to?
And then, or look at like Horitoshi family. And then all the people that aren't even actual family members, but there's a huge following of the Horitoshi style. There's a huge following of the Horitsune style. And I think, you know, when you take that back to the Japanese schools of painters, like the Utagawa school, you know, Kano Hogai, the Hogai school, like, you know, the Shohaku, like it just like, it's kind of cool to see an aesthetic go, you know? And, I mean, I don't know if State of Grace has an aesthetic. I like to think that, you know, we do quality tattoos. But I also think we kind of all have like sort of a different style here, maybe. I don't know, but, you know, I think if anything though, that there is definitely a camaraderie though, you know?
Yeah. So that goes into my next question, which is, you studied for 11 years, if I remember correctly, as an apprentice, or 10?
Yeah.
Okay.
10. I think 10 officially.
Okay.
Yeah, about that. Yeah.
Okay. So, what is something that? How would you describe trying to find your style and your own way outside of your master? Because a thing that I think a lot of people don't really realize now and today, especially because you had such a stylistic and a traditional upbringing as a tattooer, you know, a very culture based one. Most people today, like back to dank tattoo memes, you know, they're like, all right, my apprentice has an apprentice, or my apprentice's apprentice finishes his apprenticeship the day of his apprenticeship, or some stupid shit like that. But I mean, like, the idea of most people do 6 months of an apprenticeship, they don't scrub tubes, they don't know anything, which, don't get me wrong, there's many forms of an apprenticeship, but you literally spent a decade learning and building.
So, but to clarify it, like, I think I was what you'd call like a satellite apprentice, like, and I think one thing with the Japanese tattoo structure, like Horitomo, for example, was in Yokohama, like doing the daily. But I think one thing about Japanese tattoo families, as you know, I can only speak for ours, but it's it's not just an idea of like you're apprenticing, but you're also part of a larger thing. You're part of a unit. So, like for example, a lot of my responsibilities came to like translation, writing, press, things like that. Like everyone sort of had their things that you check in with the master. This is what work looks like. And I think I don't know. It's a tough one because I think everyone does it differently. You know, like when we apprenticed Colin here, like we had him kind of like, well, why don't you come by 2 days a week? You can kind of hang out and see what you're, okay, you're doing good. All right, we're gonna let you like start scrubbing tubes, and we'll let you start mopping. Like we made him do this. Like I think he was at 2 days a week for like 3 months, and then we had him full time for almost 2 years before we let him tattoo. Ironically, Colin's first tattoo is on Horitomo, which is pretty. Actually, his first is on himself.
Right.
The first person he actually tattooed beyond that was Horitomo, which imagine talk about being nervous, right? But at that point, like it was like he was like family. But for us, it was like I guess I was like, and I had even told him like at this I don't anymore, but at that time I was like I serve a master, so therefore if you're my apprentice, you have to serve him as well. So Colin ended up doing a lot of work for the big man up in Japan, like laying out books, doing stuff like that. So I think the definition of what is an apprentice is different. Like I think
of
nowadays
course.
too, like there's probably you're right. Like there probably are people that like don't teach their apprentices how to make needles or mix ink because they probably don't even know themselves, right?
Right.
But it's like you said, times are changing. Like I mean, some of these people might be amazing tattooers, and I think it's funny because like sometimes I'll see stuff on social media, and sometimes I feel like there's like tattooers that feel that maybe time has passed them by. And they're complaining like, oh, this young kid has like 100 million followers and is booked forever, and I think like then there's like these young kids that like don't respect their elders, and I think there's gonna always be both, because there always is gonna be some kid that thinks they know everything and is like fuck the old guys, and there's gonna be some old guys like these new kids don't know what they're doing, but there's also gonna be new kids that respect their elders, and there's gonna be elders that welcome the new kids and kind of more like usher them in, and I think like it's just a matter of perspective, Well, let me stay positive about it because at one point like I read a quote in a Tattoo Archive newsletter, and it said like these newcomers are ruining this industry, and they were talking about Ed Hardy. You know what I mean? At one point, Ed Hardy was that new guy shaking it up.
Yeah.
And I'm not like like I'm not saying I know what the future will bring, but like I'm just saying that like like life in general is always in flux, and so is the tattoo world.
Well, like the funny thing is, so I'll rephrase that question, but tying onto that was, like what was it? It was I can't believe I can't forget his name right now. But anyways, it was an artist that was on a podcast speaking about it too, and Russ Abbott, that's who it was. And he was referring to it as like, who the hell are these tattoo gods? Who are these tattoo people that are defining what is ruining what? He goes, we all know what is good, what is not. He goes, but think about to 1925. He goes, the guys who are the grandfathers of tattooing, and that a lot of these new old schoolers that, worship and all this stuff. He goes, those guys had no rules. They had to figure it out. And they dictated the rules. He goes, but if you go to the tribalistic tattoos, whether it be in the islands, whether it be in Japan, that was going on way before these guys. So how come they can dictate the rules, but they can't be judged by anybody else? So, he goes, someone's always trying to find their place. Now, speaking of finding places, to reform that question, it's like after so long under a master, you do pick up habits, you do pick up a style, you do pick up a discipline. How hard was it for you to break away from it and to incorporate it into your own sense of style or learning? Because we're always a product of what we learn, but we're always a progression from that as well. So how is that for you?
Okay, like for example, like I think with Japanese, right? Like, and it's funny because Grimy and Craig put up the water books, and I remember when they were talking about that, it was like because you can totally tell, like, oh, that's so and so's water, that's so and so's water, right? And it's funny because I feel like all the major families almost pick like this person does Soga Shohaku water, this person does like it's kind of based off old Japanese art, Chinese art, but like for that was one point for me where I wanted to like draw waves like differently than my ex-master. And that's something I worked at. I know that's something Horitomo's worked at, like where they, and it's not meant as a sign of disrespect because our master used to talk about this saying in Japanese, shuhari, where you create, you learn, then you create this world, but then you destroy the world to create a new world. And I think, like we talked about, like all creation is like that. Like, you're going to do this podcast and then you're going to do the next one differently, and hopefully better. And that's like, that's part of it. And it isn't easy, but it's also something like I was consciously doing. And, I think like it's just like, how can I say this? Like, you just really like, it has to be important to you. Cause I've seen tattooers too because look, let's like I said earlier, like we're at a time in tattooing where there's like, I mean, I swear I'll look through social media. Everyone's got good lines. Everyone's packing in color. Like it's crazy. Like how, like when I started tattooing, like it was almost like even just like finding people that could just tattoo properly, like good lines, solid color was something. But now it's like, I feel like everyone does that. And it's like, so what really excites me is what is original, who's doing something original, who's got, and I think this is true of any art, who has something to say, like, is it just pictures? Is it this? And I'm not saying it has to be, cause at the end of the day, like, like I think when, remember that period of time where everyone's like, tattoos have to have meaning. They have to have meaning. They have to have meaning. And I would get that a lot because they're like, oh, like I would get people saying like, oh, we love Japanese stuff because everything has a meaning. I was like, yeah, there's some truth to that, but it's like, let's face it too, like all these guys drawing this stuff and all these men and women, they're also artists with egos, with creative minds. Sometimes people do stuff just because it looks good. At the end of the day, like to me, like, I mean, the meanings are important, but if your tattoo looks like crap, who cares, right? Like it's a visual art.
Well, like the funny thing, the funny thing, and you're correct, because like the funny thing is the way I've always heard, like if you don't have a tattoo, and it's always funny because it's the person with like the tiniest little tattoo that's like, I can't stand anyone who gets a tattoo and it just doesn't mean anything. And it's like, well, they ask me like, what do yours mean? I go, well, it's like an art gallery. I buy friends' prints, I buy friends' books because I love their work.
That's actually a really good way to put it.
And I collect art. So I chose these specific pieces because A, it's what I loved. And or if it was like back in the day, I have 2 Joe Capobianco pieces on my hand, which back then I saw his caricature style of work and I said, I like that. But obviously I was 16 at the time. Yeah, I got my hands tattooed real young. And I was just like, for me, I knew nothing about Joe as a person. I didn't know where to go. Obviously I was too young. So one of my buddies was like, yeah, let's do it. And he did a damn good job. I mean, for shit. But the thing is when people ask me today, do you regret any of it? It's like, no, because would I get something different? Would I have chosen stuff? Probably. I think most of us would have started a different way, but it's part of where you're at. It's part of what you do collect. And I think the funny thing I've seen as of late is how people are trying to, now with the fad of like everything has to have a meaning. On Hiroshi III's Instagram, he does his freehand tattoos. And some girl, and I like going to the comments sometimes because for me, I'm a lurker. I'll look at things and I try to really understand. Because to me, it's good. It's good discipline when you see somebody insult someone that like if someone insulted you, I consider you a friend as well as someone I look up to. So I naturally, as a person, want to be like, you're wrong. But it also helps you to be like, well, let it roll off your back. And the funny thing was there was this younger girl who goes, ooh, girl. I mean, you can totally tell she's white. She goes, ooh, girl, this man stole your tattoo. He gonna get it real hurt. And it was like, what the hell was he tattooing? So I looked back at the video. It was a honey mask. And the girl responds back very simply. And she goes, girl, that's a common tattoo. I just like the way it looked. And to me, I was like, that's like a very respectful way, as well as very chill. But there are people out there who are like, oh my God, that's your tattoo. You're the only person on earth with 2 roses, a pocket watch, and a goddamn chain going through it. Nobody else on this world has it.
There was a really good, by the way, Dank Tattoo Memes did a really good one about that. And the day they dropped that, Tyler did a rose pocket watch. It was amazing. I was like, Tyler, look at this. But yeah, but at the end, but this is the thing. Okay. It's like I get people like, well, I don't want a koi or a dragon because everyone has it or whatever. But then there's also like sometimes like people do things because like it just like it resonates. Like it's like if you like a song, are you gonna stop listening to it because other people like it? You know what I mean? Like you know, like, but then there's also stuff too, like, you know, like I think where there is, like, we interviewed this guy in Samoa, Wati, and he's a high chief, and he has a full bodysuit done by hand by Patello, but it's not like your traditional malafia. But and his reasoning was that he's like, everyone has the same type of tattoo here. I wanted something different. You know, so there's always going to be that, and that's the thing is that, like, you know, like that's how culture is. There's always going to be that, you know, there's going to be, like in Japan, like, you know, you get all the old masters together and then none of them will agree about, oh no, that means that, no, it doesn't, that, you know, because they have their different interpretation and none of them are wrong. It's just the way it is, you know, like everyone interprets things differently, and even now some of those definitions are being changed, you know. I'll watch Horitomo change things and create new things, and it's exciting, but it's also like it's part of the creative process. Right. And I think all of us as artists, like, I mean, that's why we do this, right? Like, you know, I mean, like, it's not like, you know, I'm sure there's a certain percentage of tattooers that just do it as a job, but I think the rest of us, like I feel like you or me and most of our colleagues care about this, and we're trying to like make something cool, you know, like, you know, one thing by the way, that I thought was kind of awesome, like, so like I was saying, like everyone tattoos great now. It's, you know what I mean? Like everyone does, but like here and there I'll see like standouts, like, oh my God, that guy's so good, or this, you know what I mean? Like there's like I'm super stoked on that guy Luciano. Oh yeah. From Mexico City, who does those big block, big like the lettering. Yeah. I mean, just because it's so fresh and new. There was like these guys in Japan doing the Jomon project. Jomon Japan is like pre Yayoi, is like before Chinese and Korean immigration. So it's kind of more of like the original indigenous tribal Japan, like before the written language. But it's like all these crazy tribal designs, which, I mean, and these are speculations because they don't obviously have photos or mummies, you know, but they have like figurines that have these markings. But there's been these young Japanese artists that have decided to start tattooing those and sort of trying to recreate what they think might have been an old culture, you know. And so stuff like that I think is very interesting to me. Right. I also think like it's cool to just like, you know, my friend C. Liufao, you know, just a year and a half ago he got his Sulape title. He got the sticks, so he's now tapping. He has the right to tap, you know, the traditional malafia and the malu, and I think that's amazing. Like, you know, here he is, a Samoan American who gets to be part of, you know, a 2,000-year tradition. You know, that's really cool. And then there's cool stuff too, like, you know, I love looking like Koji Ichimaru is like super bold, basically traditional Americana meets Japan mix, you know what I mean? Like there's so much cool stuff happening right now. So, you know, it's exciting. Like, I think like, you know, like that's what I mean. Like I'm not, and I think that's one thing, like talking about podcasts, I don't ever want to be like the bitter guy. Like, okay, for example, we saw a period of time where I felt like the generation shifted and didn't care about books as much. Like a lot of the medium became digital. Right. Like you get people like, well, I don't need that. I'm just going to Google image search, or I've got all my reference on my iPad. And whereas I still like to hold a book, you know, but I mean, I can either embrace that or be mad about it. I'm still going to make books here and there, but at the same time, like I said, I just bought an iPad too, you know, because it is convenient. Like you can put hundreds of photos on there and not lug around a bunch of books. You know, I get that. I understand. Like I have a whole bedroom of books, and I'll still Google image search just because it's faster than going through all those books to find that one woodblock print that I need as reference, you know? Yeah. And it's, you know, we're all part of this convenience society, you know?
Well, it's also important about the influence behind it, because if you think about it, I grew up, obviously, I mean, late 80s, early 90s. So technology had not come full force, but but grew up enough when it became progressive. So, I mean, within that span, I always had preferred digital. And as a kid, I think if it weren't for comic books, I would never naturally want to have a physical book. And it's funny because I started up until 4 or 5 years ago. You know, I had heard Chet Zar say something that really resonated in my head of like Chet Zar being a painter, for anyone that doesn't know him. And he said, you know, you're only as good as your library. And I thought about that and I was like, huh. And I looked at my library and I had one book and I was like, well, then I'm not very good, you know? And as I started progressing more and more, technology is here for convenience. You know, podcasts came to me in the form of this is the closest way, especially with as much networking as I try to do, that I'm always lucky to get in random situations. How the hell I got around you and to film the BJ Betts Symbol Orcus thing is an astronomical thing that just happened to fit at the right time. I had the right camera, whatever, whatnot. But I came away with, getting to meet you. I came away with getting to see your shop and being able to talk to Chaz a little bit more, being able to talk to BJ a little bit more. And it's a great, interesting thing to have that technology, have those areas that you learn from. But the more and more I've been able to talk to people, the more and more I appreciate a physical medium, because no matter what it is, I mean, the idea of a song versus on an iPod versus iPhone or whatever versus a vinyl. My girlfriend has taught me like vinyl helps you out tremendously because we lost the necessity to listen to an entire album. And I was like, okay, so I did it, and now it's hard for me to go back when I have the choice of what medium I want. Books wise, it comes to someone like you is where you're passing on a physical medium to artists, to where it's like you have to physically sit down, and what takes you 2 hours to draw, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years to really sit down and execute only takes 2 seconds to discard on Google. But when you sit in front of a book and you literally look and you literally study something, you do appreciate it more. And like you said, even though everything's at a digital medium, I feel that people today and age, the more they learn, which comes down to the arrogance of being young, on my notepad right here, is, like you said, when you first started off and you were telling, or your masters were telling you, we need you to trace all these things. And you're like, well, I don't want to. I want to do my own art. The idea when you're young, whether it be by age or whether it be by skill, is that you know it all. That's the sad thing about being young, is because you're trying to keep up with people who are older or more crafted than you are, rather than admitting I'm wrong or okay, I'll just do that. So when you shift it to a digital and a physical medium, I feel that that's another thing too, is that growing up, it's so much easier to grab an iPad or an iPhone or an Android and look and look and look and look. I'm pretending to scroll something here for anyone can't see me, but it's so much easier to do that. But it's so much more meaningful if you go ahead and you grab a book like this. One of my favorite books is The Art of Horror, and it goes through every single artist dating back to even the 1600s of how they started painting. And they're going to give you the subject of the devil. How is it for 200 years, 1,000 different artists have interpreted it in 1,000 different ways and still kept it unique? But physically having that helps you appreciate and study on that more. So with you,
well, it's funny that you mentioned. Mm-hmm.
No, go ahead. Continue. I'm sorry.
No, but back to when you said about the vinyl thing, I think that's also changed the way artists write albums.
Yep.
Artists used to do concept albums, where you have to listen it in the order.
Mm-hmm.
It would set a mood, a tone, and tell a story throughout the whole album. And now it's and the other thing that died with digital music is awesome cover art. Artists used to really spend a lot of time figuring out their cover art, and I think that's the same thing here. And it's just but what you said about the reference, that was very true. When I first started tattooing in the '90s, I remember when I saw that book Tibetan Tonka Painting. Mm-hmm. And some people told me, oh, don't tell other people about this book because there's all these amazing line drawings we don't want. And I think this goes back to those, when you read Sailor Jerry's letters, they talk about having the edge because you have this design or this ink, And now because of Google, everything's everywhere.
Yeah.
I do remember something funny though. We had it's actually kind of ties into us, the Chaz and BJ seminar at the convention, because we always wanted to have really educational seminars, right? So we had Shige's seminar, we had Horitomo's first ever seminar, we had the Chris Kahn seminar first, and one of the things Kahn said was, hey, if you're going to use Google as reference, go to the last page.
Yes, because
you can tell sometimes when you look at on Instagram, you'll be oh, all these people Googled the same rows, or they, you know what I mean? You can already see that, and I think that's the thing. It's there is still a certain amount of strength to how much research you're doing. I remember though, Grimy, when he first went to Japan, I think it was in '99, he went to the Kyosai Museum, bought 2 bags full of books, just wanted every bit of paper on Kyosai that he could find. And, I still think, especially with Japanese tattooing, I feel every serious artist in that style has like a huge library, you know. And it's one of my favorite books I have in my collection. It's actually a Kyosai one, but it's an actual woodblock print book, all bound, and it's old, and it has that old smell because it's like over 100 years old, and you know what I mean. But like, I feel like remember like old leather bound books and rich mahogany.
Yes,
but no,
yes.
but remember like the books that would have the bookmark.
Yes, they would.
I always thought that was so cool. Like remember Ed Hardy's Rock of Ages book?
Yes.
He did that.
Yeah.
And you know, like to make something kind of cool and almost precious. You know, and I feel like you know, like I feel that way about some of my tattoo machines. You know, and this is one thing I will say about like, you know, like a lot of those old coil builders, man, you know, those machines like had a lot of character, you know.
Of course.
But,
well, each one was individual.
The neat rotary guys, so Dan Kubin really, like, he makes like a good looking machine.
Speaking about Dan, which ties into the whole poster art, or I'm sorry, the cover art thing. When we were sitting next to Dan and his wife the entire convention, and he spoke a little bit. I mean, not too much. We went to the bar after. It was Juan from World of Pencils, myself, and him, and his wife, and he just started talking, and it was so nice to hear about. I mean, he sold out of a case of machines before the convention opened. Everybody who was ever, and to me, I had never heard of Dan because I personally, I was never really one to collect machines outside of like Dredgenberg.
You're freezing up over there.
Oh, it's fine. It's probably just the connection.
Yeah, we got a connection right now.
Oh, there you go. No, I was saying I had never seen anything out of like Dredgenberg or my time machines, you know, the older ones. But the thing is when I met him, he was just passionate, and he would tell everybody, he goes, bring your machine to me, and I will, before you buy it, I will tune it. Tell me what you want. If it comes back and it's mine for life, I will guarantee it for life. I will tune it. Show me the machine you have right now, and I'll help you. The idea of how much he cared about what he did to make the entirety of what you're doing even better, from the look to the feel to the way it runs, you know, to me that was something great. Now going back to the whole thing of the, if you don't have this book personally for yourself, it's a great one. That's a 2-3 part series. It's called Oh My God Posters, A Decade of Rock Art. And everyone from Ken Taylor to Jerry Poshton, these dudes, they're all one-offs that they create for their albums as well as for shows. And the reason why this is important to me is because, like you were saying earlier, you know, I personally started getting into album art. I've always been a cover art enthusiast, and a friend had said, hey, could you do my actual album vinyl art? And I said, okay, I'll try it. And we found a way to take one 12 by 36 image and cut it in half and fold it to where on the backside, when you outfold it, it's all the lyrics and photos of his gigs. And then the front is half of a mermaid. The other half is coral turning into an old heart. But the idea was, I literally would have never had the idea or the drive to think of something for that unless there was a creative platform for it. And going back to what you're saying is, sometimes we tend to forget that if you put yourself on a creative, I know it's the wrong word, but pedestal, like putting your ideas into the way of, like you're saying, these gentlemen in Japan are creating these tribalistic tattoos that they are interpreting. You have people who are doing an Americana outlook on Japanese itself. Like, you have these guys and these girls that are just putting themselves in a situation where you have to be creative, you know. And you're right. The worst thing in the world is that if you think you have, you know, hit the mother lode of some reference and it's on the first or second page of Google, someone's already done it. You know what I mean? So having that idea, having those abilities to look at new and bigger projects through the eyes of studying, of reference, of research, I think that gets lost a lot, you know. And that's why I admire how you're talking about, you know, people like, well, Ken Taylor, who I was referring to, and Dan Kubin. There are so many different cogs in the tattoo world. There are so many different cogs in the art world. You know, people who make the brushes, who make the needles, who make the papers, who make the tattoo machines. And at the end of the day, is it all comes together. But how you use it, how you become innovative, comes from people like you and your wife. You guys make all these amazing books, and I've bought in 2 of your books over the years, and I need to buy a lot more from you. But the reality is, you guys literally do what I admire in a book. You have history in written and visual form. Like, you literally go over who these people were, what this was, what was important, and that comes down to technique. That comes down to dedication. Now, you had told me, which I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on, when I was at your studio, you were talking about how you had gotten like an old book. It was over 100, over some like 120 years old. It was a tiny little book that flipped open widthwise, very thin, very long.
Oh, yeah.
And you were showing me all these different stories, and you were explaining who this was, what clan they were from, and so forth, and that the importance of understanding the story helps you with understanding how to draw and tattoo it, whether it be color, whether it be style wise. And I think that a lot of people don't really understand how much actual knowledge goes behind what you do. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think it's also like, like how much goes into it is really up to each tattooer. It's also up to each client, like how much they're gonna like. Like when and I'm not saying everyone's in agreement here, but for me, Japanese tattooing in essence is like you're representing a culture. Mm-hmm. Like, so there's a historical reference. So let's say you're like I did a back piece of Miyamoto Musashi, like Japan's most famous swordsman, and it was like kind of like his epic final battle where he defeats his arch nemesis, Kojiro. But I made sure so in the story he uses basically carves an oar, like a boat oar, into like a staff, and that's what he uses to crush Kojiro's skull. So, instead of a sword, he's holding that. And I had read in the story, and this was in the Yoshikawa Eiji version, that he left his long sword in the boat. So he only has his short sword. And then there's also a thing where they're saying Kojiro, when they both kind of clashed, like he cut off Musashi's headband. And then it even said in the story how many times Musashi had folded it. So I had it falling off, folded that many times. And I think like these are little details, like this is just one example, but where it just makes it fun. Like, I think clients enjoy that. I think for me, it makes it feel like I'm telling the story properly. And when I see people like doing and they'll have the kimono folded the wrong way, and I'll kind of explain to them, like, it's not like having a hat and wearing it backwards. That's like putting your hat on your foot, like no Japanese would ever do that. Like, and then there's some people that are like, well, I don't care. I just like draw, and that's fine,
Yeah.
And that's totally fine. But for me, if I'm gonna do like something, I mean, this is why I don't also, for example, like I don't do Polynesian tattooing because I don't know enough about it. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the symbols mean enough. I have a lot of friends that could probably help me, but I don't want to do that disrespect, And I feel like for me, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it right. And I think for that, like inherently with Japanese tattooing, like it's not just like finding a print and copying it, but also understanding why they did this flower there, or why this is going on, and what the story is. And then, and I think that's sometimes it can be, it's kind of perspective, like if you think it's tedious or tiresome or like annoying, well, I mean, I hate to break it to you, but that's kind of how Japanese culture is. Like, it is kind of a tedious culture sometimes at times, but that's also the beauty of it, like, so you can't have one without the other. Like, but I think like, it's like anything, like you put that work in and you research about it, like you get that much more reward. Like you get kind of stoked, like, oh, I figured this out. Oh man, like, I should draw this. And then sometimes you're wrong and you have to research more, like, but I think it's also like, I'm at a huge advantage because I get to work with Horitomo and Horifuji. Mm-hmm. So I get to pick their brains and what they know. They're extremely knowledgeable. Like I said, like you give me a lot of credit, but it's not like I'm not as smart as you think I am. I've just kind of been around the right people. I know who to ask advice from. Right. I think, which maybe that is being smart, is knowing when you don't know something and knowing who to ask. But I guess that's what it is. Like, I think a lot of stuff you me for is not me so much. It's just me knowing who the right source is, who can give the right answers.
But even that's a good thing too, because I mean, don't sell yourself short. At the end of the day, some things like I get a lot of I get
false modest here.
No. But to me,
because I hate that.
Nah,
I'm not trying to be like, oh my god, this, but like at the same time, like, but I do feel that, like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like grateful. Like,
of course.
I mean, look at the people we get to work with, just even at the convention,
Well,
like, seriously,
the thing is that
like, how can we not, like, we're around like such creativity, like, it's awesome, and it's just like, that's what I mean. Like, I don't know, it just, I feel like there's a lot of things in the world to be negative about, but I mean, like, tattooing is awesome, man. Like,
well, you're proprietor of knowledge, as well as you do know the right people. But the main thing is that the reason I say don't sell yourself short is because, I have a lot of people who do email me. I have a lot of people who message me or whatever on Instagram or Gmail, and they'll tell me like, oh man, I really love podcasts, the podcast, or I love, the fact that you're always sharing a book or this and that. Like, a lot of people don't like the fact that I don't post a lot of tattoos, or I don't post enough tattoos, but I post too many books, or I don't post enough books and educational stuff, but I post too much artwork or this or that. And it's like, there's no way to keep anyone happy. But at the end of the day, it's about what I want, And if I'm a little bit of everything, and I am a proprietor of someone who wants to show people, enthusiastic, but as well as people that you need to know about, people that you should know about. And whether you have credit saying that you're around good people and good influences, I know that somebody, if they had a question, whether it be art, tattoo, or just related to what our craft is, you would be the right person to ask. And sometimes that's more than enough, because like I said, I could go to you and ask you, hey man, I'm really interested in learning more about, how to properly draw a bodysuit. Whether it's coming from you, a book, or another artist, you would have the answer in my eyes, or at least the direction that I would need to go in. And I think that that's a very important thing to have, because let's go back to the whole idea of the two men that are doing the style of the tribalistic Japanese. People don't really look at language the way it really is. Even today, we think everyone's up to date because of Google, but think of it this way. Can you read Russian at all?
No.
Neither can I. But to someone in Russian who does not understand English, the word dog is a 3-letter word that is simple for anyone to read, even a child. But yet we don't understand that someone in Russian can't read that, or we can't read their word for dog if it's in their lettering. And now imagine Russia and imagine America are completely gone tomorrow. From those points of view, if those remnants are left and the word dog in Russian and in English are still there, but nobody knows what they mean, you can only interpret that. If someone has studied the language, then they can say, well, you know what? I think it means Great Dane, or I think it means Frenchy. It's an interpretation of what the word actually means, but it's not necessarily 100%. I look at what those two gentlemen are doing as well as what you do, and you carry on what you can from what you read and so forth, but you also learn from other people. And that's valuable to me, because in 20, 30 years from now, where is tattooing going to be? Where is the artwork and the traditions going to be as it progresses? Because the further that we move forward, the further away we move away from where it started. And it takes people like yourself, people that you know, people that you help write books about with your wife, that that help push that towards artists like myself. You had your Bob Roberts book that we gave away for the competition, and I read it before the competition because I just wanted to get the information in, and it was an outstanding book. It was a great book, but to me, it's like I would have never known anything about that. And so having that is just as important as being that, because sometimes people tend to forget that, the funniest story I'll ever remember is from a shop in Los Angeles I was working at. And one of the artists was throwing a fit because they could not figure out the color purple. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you can't figure out the color purple? And they were like, yeah, man, I just can't mix it right. And they were frustrated, like you said, the 20-year mark for them. And they were just having a bad day. And the world was, here and there. And all of a sudden, I was like, well, it's red and blue. And the person goes, oh, yeah. In a quick second, I go, how do you forget purple? Like, we're talking, joking about it. And they said, well, think of it this way. You're like a doctor freshly out of college. You're reading about everything, you're studying, and you're trying to pass that test. You're trying to prove yourself. So everything to you is high and bright. But after years and years and years of doing something, sometimes you're so caught up in how you're doing something, you do forget how it's done. And having that contrast between someone who is a proprietor of knowledge, someone who's a practitioner, and someone who is a study of it, kind of keeps everyone in check and balance, at least in my book, if that makes sense. But let's start talking about the Tatao project that you had done. Now, when I had gone over to you, this was roughly around 2 years ago or something, I believe. You guys were still filming it. You had showed me some small clips, and I mean, it was outstanding. Beautiful cinematography work. How did that come about? And what did you go through as you experienced it?
Well, so to talk about Tatao, we have to go back actually 5 years. Perseverance. So the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles, the director wanted to do a show about Japanese tattooing. So he asked a friend of mine, Kip Fulbeck, who's a UC Santa Barbara professor, if he would do the show. And Kip is also a photographer. He's tattooed. He actually I did his sleeves, and then Horitomo did his back. And but he was like, well, he's like, I'm not a tattoo artist, so I'll be the photographer of Taki Curates. So that's how that came about. Now, in the course of that, to kind of show like the widespread expansion or influence rather of Japanese tattooing, I was showing tattoos that weren't Japanese but followed Japanese form. Like, for example, like an American style tattoo but done in a Japanese back piece, or what's very common with modern Polynesian work is to have like the chest panel that, it's filled with Polynesian designs, but it's reminiscent of the Hikai Japanese chest panel. So a very good friend of mine, Sulape Steve Looney, like we photographed one of his clients, he had 2 Samoan chest panels. And that was like an example of kind of like a cross-cultural, fusion influence type tattoo. When we're at the opening, and for me, this was a big deal. Like I always felt like, I think you and I both would agree that tattoos are art, and I think like, in this last decade, we've seen tattoos being shown in a lot of museums. So that's a good thing. That's progress. It's like, not just like a novelty, but we're actually like art. Like I actually currently right now have a tattoo in the Museum of Modern Art in New York as part of a fashion exhibit. And it's actually of a Japanese munewari split chest form on a woman. And kind of like and if you think about it, there's like certain tattoos that have very clearly influenced fashion, Anyhow, so at the opening, Steve says to me like, hey, you got to do this for my people, man. Like, like Samoa, we got to have a show about Samoan tattooing. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So, we made certain like an outline and a proposal. The museum approved it. So we got a team together, we got some photographers together, some filmers. And, it ended up with a bunch of trips to New Zealand, Hawaii, Samoa, American Samoa. I mean, it was a magical trip. It was amazing. It was a lot more work than I thought it would be. In fact, the video portion of that is still being worked on. And you're probably going to laugh because I'm sure you're like, it's not that easy. But, like actually filming and then editing and putting it all together has proven to be a lot more daunting of a task. Oh, yeah. But, we had a very successful opening. We put out a nice catalog. I think the show's actually due to travel at the end of this year. So, that was, we had like an extended run at the museum. But that felt, that was like a project that I'm very proud of. Like, it was also for me, like, I just feel lucky that I got to be able to see all that, like, I mean, even just visiting other countries is great. But to be able to kind of go behind the scenes and to meet, a lot of the people we did, it was very inspiring. I learned a lot, and it's really cool to just like see a culture that's been tattooing for so long. Like it's amazing.
It was phenomenal to see the actual footage that you had shown me. You had told me the story of your cinematographer losing a drone in the water, and
I lost 2 drones.
God.
2 drones.
Oh man.
One in Hawaii, the wind took it, and then one in Samoa, it was like we were filming over the ocean and it just dropped. And then it was funny because someone fished it out, and had it on a canoe, and then it burst into flames because I didn't realize because the salt water hit the surfboard. I don't know anything about technology, so I'm like, oh my god, like this is terrible.
Abandoned ship.
No one got hurt, you know.
I mean, the footage was amazing in general, but also the fact that you were telling me passionately about how, you know, I had met some of the Sulapes. I remember we have a new Polynesian kid at our shop, and I'm learning little bit by little bit of, you know, everything. But we had met them at the convention, and you were telling me about, you know, the people you had being interviewed. You had people that were going to be in from, you know, a tribal aspect, and it was interesting because once you start seeing that, to me, I'm looking at the opposite spectrum of where it's like, man, so many people need to see stuff like that because it gives you a big idea of where a lot of not only the culture but where tattooing started, where the artwork, like you said, tattoos, we agree, are art, but people up until the past 10 years haven't considered it to be that way. Right. Now, because it's a trend, it's art. But if you transcend the idea of pop culture, it's been around for thousands of years, and it's an outstanding thing. And it gives you a second wind of being proud of what you do as a craft, as a person, as an artist, because you see somebody who, especially like in Samoan cultures and island culture, they're very loving people. They're very happy. They're very loud. And, you know, meeting some of the guys during the Bay Area convention, it was just amazing to watch them. But they're always joking around. They're always this and that. And then when they start talking about what they do, they talk about it with the same amount of guff and of pride as I'm sure that they have way before.
And that's the thing too, because in some cases, like, and I'm not saying a tattoo has to be any more or less than anything, but for example, I think Japanese tattooing is like more than just pictures. I think it's like a story of a culture of a nation, right? Mm-hmm. Now with Samoan tattooing, Samoan tattooing was also like, aside from like, I mean, that it was resistance, like, you know, like all the islands were colonized. Samoa was the only place where tattooing survived for a while. Like a lot of places had to have revivals because the colonists, like, you know, either for religious reasons or for whatever, they said tattooing was illegal. So, like, for example, the Maoris, they would put the designs into carvings to save them. Mm-hmm. The Samoans got to tattoo, but, you know, some of the literature I read was talking about how what actually upset the colonists more than the tattoo per se was the fact that, like, the celebration afterwards. Because there's a blessing, there's dancing, and you know, because it's like you're trying to colonize a nation, you don't want them to like retain their own cultural identity. And so I think now we're seeing in this era too, like a whole new generation of, you know, Samoan Americans and Polynesian Americans that are using this tattoo to like reclaim their culture, and then people outside of the community that are using this tattoo to learn about the culture. So, you know, I think like it can definitely be a vessel. Like at the end of the day, like tattoo is just ink and skin, you know. But from there, what it can mean or be changes a lot, you know? And so in this instance, like a tattoo can actually be something that holds a country's culture together, and, you know, kind of, or it can also just be something that's fun. Like it, you know, there's not really a requirement, but I guess part of the fun for us is to explore all that, you know, and like sort of like see all the different ways that it can manifest itself.
So I'm going to ask you a question, and it's not to be too controversial or anything, but as somebody who is mixed, as well as somebody who is in the profession, what is your stance as a Japanese man who does Japanese tattoos of people getting Japanese artwork? Because there are two things that I see tremendously and I hear amongst, you know, circuits, convention circuits, as well as artists in general, as to where the mainstream kind of wants to get up an ass and in arms about, well, if you're not Japanese, you shouldn't get Japanese tattoos. If you're not Polynesian, you shouldn't get Polynesian tattoos. But there are many people you have tattooed, and I know that you're not one to really, I don't want to say the word care because that's not what I mean, but you understand where I'm saying it. But like, you don't care if somebody that's not Japanese gets a Japanese piece. But how do you feel about people who say stuff like that and then experiencing the tatau culture, the Japanese culture, to where, like you said, there are people that do it to have their sense of culture, but they also do it because they want to share it with the world.
Well, I mean, yeah, clearly, I don't have a problem with, non-Japanese getting tattoos or doing them for that matter. I think it has to do with intent. Like, I think I would expect anybody, Japanese or not Japanese, I would hope they respect the art, that they treat it well, that they do it well, that they try to do a good job, But, like, if you actually look at it, this is ironic because, I mean, Japanese tattooing has had more problems with its own government than anywhere else. Mm-hmm. It's gone through so many different periods of being illegal. When Japan opened to the West in the Meiji period, the government didn't want them to appear barbaric to Westerners, so they said tattooing was illegal. Mm-hmm. And then, like the Crown Prince of Russia, like British royalty came over, and they were like, hey, we want to get tattooed. We heard Japanese tattoos are great. So, ironically, they allowed, like, tattooing in Yokohama by people like Horichio to tattoo these Westerners. So there's always been a history of Japanese tattooing non-Japanese. That actually also exists in Samoa. I've interviewed the head of state, the prime minister, the head of Samoan studies at the college there, and their stance on that was that, it's one of those things where if the tattoo master deems you worthy, you're allowed. And there's actually a long history of Tongans getting tattooed, Tongan royalty getting tattooed by Samoans, because Samoans were just known to be amazing tattooers at that time, still are. But also, too, it was like against their rules to spill a king's blood on his own soil. So you can see where so they'd have to go somewhere else. So as far as other people being upset, that's fine. I mean, it's a free country. You can think whatever you want. I feel like for me, I can defend my actions. This recent thing happened where I tattooed that Munewari split chest on this woman, and and she's white. And I guess somebody sent her a message like, oh, 2 words, cultural appropriation. And to me, I'm like, first off, I wish the person had messaged me, because I would have been like, 2 words, fuck you. Because it's like, I'm Japanese. I can trace my roots back to like Edo period samurai class. Mm-hmm. No one's going to tell me who I can or can't tattoo on, okay, first off. Secondly, we're talking about tattoos, okay? These aren't like any rich person can go to Japan and buy like a handmade sword if they got $20,000 or $30,000. To get that much tattoo work, you got to sit and endure that. You've earned it, Yeah. Now, I think, like I said, it comes to intent. Is this girl trying to be Japanese? No, but she has an appreciation for Japanese art. Mm-hmm. As a Japanese American, I think that's great. I think Japanese art's awesome. So it's like I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem when I see people doing disrespectful stuff, I guess, with it, like that, mm-hmm. But that's like, to me, like when I did Perseverance, I included a ton of tattooers in there that weren't of Japanese descent that did tattoos on non-Japanese people.
Right.
I recently had a guy DM me and he was saying like, well, I'm black and like I just don't want to be disrespectful. And I was like, well, why? I wouldn't take it like that. Like if you like the art, cool. Just go make sure someone does a good job on it. You know what I mean? Like I don't like. It's like if you want to wear it,
Yeah.
I don't have that issue. Now I think this gets really tricky. Like for example with the Samoans, like the malufia and the malu, culturally that's supposed to be done with the sticks. Mm-hmm. So if I see one done by a machine, knowing what I know from being in Samoa, I'm like, But I'm not Samoan, right. So I don't feel like it's my place to say. I can say this. I got a malufia and I did it with the sticks, Sulape Peter did it. So for me, that was important. But like, I think, I don't know. I think especially with the social media age, like there's so much like commentary and most of it's anonymous. It's usually the people saying stuff for private profile, like troll accounts, But it's also, I will say this, I think it's good to have these discussions like about identity politics,
Yes.
Because it's important. And like, I think as long as you're being respectful, like, okay, for example, here's a question, like we tattoo Native American stuff, but what if like I'm not Native American, but what if my client is, or what, you know what I mean? Like there's so many facets to this because when we do art, we do it for other people. Or what if the person's not Native American, but they have an appreciation for, or I don't know. Like, I mean, you can go down so many roads here.
For you, like the reason
I can speak about Japanese art, I feel, because in Japanese, because right. I speak Japanese, because I was born in Japan. But for me, I just want to see it done well. I just want to see it done respectfully. And I think a lot of people, like a lot of my Samoan friends, that's how they feel about their art, is they want respectful wearers of it to know what it means and the responsibilities that go along with it.
Well,
and
the great thing, and the reason why I ask is because in today's age, unless you have the pass, you know what I mean, being of the Japanese descent and the culture and the language and everything, it is healthy to have a respectful conversation, because in my point of view, it's that it does not matter. I mean, I'm a mix, you know what I mean? So for me, I don't really have one lineage anywhere. So when I see people and they're like, you can't do that, that's cultural appropriation. Now, politics aside, I think most people that fight for that stuff don't have the understanding of where people that actually, like yourself, which it's good to hear someone in your position, where you're at and what you've done, say that clearly, because I feel that a lot of artists that we know mutually feel the same way. And like you said, if there's a tasteful respect for it, it needs to be heard from the people who are doing it and have put in the time that, like you said it yourself, is that if the person has an appreciation for it, regardless of their skin color and background, 9 times out of 10, if you're willing to put in that work of getting this done, you have earned it. And if the person is genuinely coming to someone, whether they are of Japanese descent or someone like, Tyler or someone else that you have seen work their ass off, if they have a respect for it, there are many people out there who will give it to them. But there are also people like, like the Sulapes, where it is such a heavy thing about culture and getting it from certain people or so forth. And, wherever it lies, it's not this giant has to be this, has to be that. But that small bit amount of respect, I think, is something that people need to understand more, because as tattooing grows, as artwork or us as artists grows, people who are great at art and come into the tattoo world have this idea of gun-ho. And I mean, more power to them if they want to do it. But there is also a lot of tradition amongst artists, amongst people that, like they say, you can catch more flies with honey than with shit. So, the idea of you saying something and you acknowledging that, it's good to hear it, because I know you're not a person that really cares too much about if someone grabs something, but you are a voice that some people do need to hear. Say, like, you know what? As long as you're respectful, go for it. But do a good tattoo. Do a great tattoo.
Yeah, exactly. Do the homework.
Do the homework.
And this is the other thing too. I get people that like, and this is like something that irritates me, but it's not like this huge deal. But like sometimes people are like, well, I want to be better at Japanese tattooing, and I'll tell them, like, go to Japan. Go visit some temples and shrines. Learn Japanese. Oh, that's a lot of work. Well, yeah, but
you're gonna learn.
What like nothing good comes easy, But at the end of the day, like, because for me, it's just more than pictures. It's a whole culture, But as far as like I'm concerned, like clearly by who I tattoo and who I include in my exhibitions and things like that, I don't like ethnicity makes no difference to me. It's about respect, and I think across the board, like I actually, like, when my wife and I we did our Samoan tattoos, I kind of expected to get a lot of heat, because I know that's a touchy subject. Mm-hmm. But everyone we've talked to has been very supportive, and I think a lot of it's because they understand where we're coming from it. Like, we're not trying to say that we're Samoan or that we have a right to say anything in their culture. Right. We're just respectfully appreciating and essentially receiving a gift that we earned. Mm-hmm. It was not easy. Trust me, it was one of the hardest things I've done in my life. And but that's also what made it special. And like I said, it kind of like cemented a bond of brotherhood between me and the people that I did this with. It was like a rite of passage, and that's a lot of what the attraction was for me. Was that I think, like, we're here in this modern society, like that's a theme that we've talked about a lot today, is technology, and like I feel like there is a certain element that feels like we need to get back to basics, like kind of like our rites of passage, or like things like, and I think tattooing is one of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is why you're never going to have machines tattooing us, because it's still that one-on-one, like, and even in like Samoa, especially, a lot of the tufungas, they're like shamans, like, and it's like it's a different type of society, and I think like and I think our modern society still needs that. Like, yeah. I think there's a need for that spirituality and that connection,
So let me go ahead and ask about the books and the publishing. We got a few minutes left. So when did you start publishing, and what were some of the books that you came out with? Because I've like I said, I've read 2 of the books that you had given me from the convention, and then some that you had donated for the podcast.
Right.
And I mean, awesome books. A lot of information into them, and talk about it a little bit.
Like my first book, Bushido: Legacy of the Japanese Tattoo, was published by Schiffer Publishing. When I went to Japan in 1998, I got my back done. I worked had Horiyoshi tattoo me 10 consecutive days. And even at that time, like there was like I think Scratch Addiction was already open, Eccentric obviously was, but tattooing was still so much more underground, and I was just keenly aware that this is a different world. Mm-hmm. And when I was in college, I was a community studies major. So basically, I did what I did in college. I observed and I wrote. So I ended up with a 70-page manuscript. My sister helped me write that. She's actually now she's like a hotshot writer. At the time, she was right out of college. She helped me with a lot with the writing. The funny thing, you're going to laugh, is we shopped that manuscript to like 30 different publishers. Most of them didn't even get back to us. A bunch of them were like, you need an agent. 2 people were interested. Schiffer was one of them. So we went with Schiffer, and they're like, okay, go get us some photos. So I went to Japan, took a bunch of photos. At that time, when it got published in 99, the Japanese distributor for Schiffer Publishing wouldn't even distribute it because they said it was Yakuza material. So it's just hilarious how different things are now.
Right.
After that, I wrote Tattoos of the Floating World, which was like a very similar book, kind of about Japanese tattooing. Next was Tattooing from Japan the West, was a collection of interviews. I was doing a lot of interviews for Mickey Violetto for Tattoo Life, so we put all those together in a book. I Love Tattoos was kind of like a later book, like a collection of just like people I'd met, like people throughout tattooing, just kind of like, hey, this is just to show you how much this has influenced my life, like all these people I've met, and because tattooing brings you to some really interesting places, Mm-hmm. While I was an apprentice of Horiyoshi, I want to say that we probably published almost 10 books for him.
Wow.
Like I kind of lost count because we were doing a bunch of volumes of his art. I also helped Juan Puente with his legacy book. That was really amazing. Juan did a great job on that. I did the Bob Roberts book. That was a huge honor. Bob is amazing, by the way. Talk about a Renaissance man. That guy's been a 1%er, badass biker, a surrealist painter, a accomplished musician, tattoo traditional master. The dude has lived like 5 lifetimes. He's amazing. Koji Ichimaru, Ichibe, like those were more like graphic books. 2 books I worked on with Horitomo, Immovable and Momon Cats. Those are all his art, but Immovable I'm very proud of. He did all the writing and the art, but we did like the translation and the publishing. But I feel like that's one of our most educational books. Mm-hmm. I think like put out a very comprehensive Fudomyo, reference book. So, but this also goes back to what we're saying is that I feel like I've just been this conduit that sort of helps sort of get these things going. Like I said, I've been around all these amazing people, and I've managed to like run some interviews and put some stuff together and then make it accessible to a larger audience, so I think, that book. Yeah.
Yeah. This book, I've read it about 8 or 9 times, and I think that's what drives me personally the most, is that people like, yourself, where, like you said, you help bring people together, you help translate and all these other things, but it's kind of the same reason why, well, it's not kind of, it is the same reason why with the podcast, why I'm so adamant about stuff like this. Is because when you read all these amazing things, like the Bob Roberts book about the whole idea of where it's like, oh, wow, I'm a musician. Oh, wow, this. Oh, wow, that. And you're like, man, this guy's just fucking living life, but he, like you had said earlier, you don't buy a lot of stuff. You use the money you have to travel and learn and experience things. So when the day comes and your number's up, you've lived life. You felt like you've lived life. And it's really awesome to see publishers like yourself. It's awesome to see artists that you bring to the table, as well as the convention with Roman, because like you had told me a long time ago, you have these artists, and it's specifically tattooing. There's no gimmicks. There is nothing else. You are there to learn, and you are there to congregate with other artists of a higher caliber. And it's not to shit on anyone else or any other conventions, but when you go there, you are going to see some bad motherfuckers. You know, you're going to see some people that know what they're doing, that are putting in
Right.
time. And it's a great thing to see on a personal level, because as I start where I'm at and moving along the world and so forth, and it's just it's very encouraging to see other people pushing education and pushing stuff to where, like you said, 20 years ago, people were like, oh, it's for Yakuza, or if it's bad and this and that.
Yeah, but you're a part of that too, though, because you're spreading it. You know what I mean? And back to what I was saying too. It's funny because I get clients all the time now. Like, do you listen to podcasts? Do you listen to podcasts? And it's the new book.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, you're gonna reach more people. Like, it's the mediums are changing. So, and I think like this is like, because I know so many people, like, they might not want to sit there and read a book, but they'll drive and listen to a podcast, or they'll be tattooing and they'll listen to a podcast. So I mean, I think it's cool to just have that energy. Like I said, like, and even those other not arguments, but discussions about cultural appropriation, those are good. They should happen.
Yeah,
people
they
should
should
talk
happen.
about it.
Yeah.
People should discuss these things. But that's the point, is discuss. You know, and I think what's
Yeah.
good is that you're creating a forum and interest. I'm still kind of in this weird point of like, I don't know who is going to like tune in and want to listen to me prattle on it. But anyhow,
No, there are people.
like, maybe you'll get like 2 listeners here. But
No, you
but
got
you know,
quite a
but
few.
it's just interesting because we're gonna have like this forum, and you're adding to like what's out there in a positive way, because there's also a lot of dribble out there. Like, you know, with the expansion of tattooing, it's like, you know, like I try not to focus on the negative because I see so much good stuff happening, but there's also a lot of garbage, you know. So just be part of the good stuff, and that's
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
that's the best thing I can think, you know.
And you're completely right. The whole idea is that the talk of like cultural appropriation, the talk of people going back and forth with the idea of culture. You know, like, I don't agree personally, politics aside for anyone, but I don't agree. I mean, being Hispanic and Japanese, that when I see somebody wear a sombrero, that it offends me. You know, if I see somebody wear a kimono, it doesn't offend me. Now, whether you're 100% Japanese, Mexican, white, whatever it is, the way I work off is respect. So with yourself, you know, I do agree that if you see, I mean, amazing artists all over the world, from España, when we go to Florence, when we go to Japan, that are doing all these other styles. In Japan, you see a lot of black and gray artists that are doing like Japanese style, Hispanic style work, Chicano work, and they're killing it. You know, there's a lot of people in Russia right now that are doing American traditional, and they're doing amazing jobs. So having that cultural shift of where people are learning, if there's a respect for it in each other, then there's not really a problem, because I don't go somewhere and tell them their business. If I'm at a convention and I see them and they're like, oh yeah, man, like I really, really want to get this American traditional Sailor Jerry tattoo. It's not like I'm going to go to them and be like, excuse me, how much American are you? Like, you know, if the person does clean work and they're just enthusiastic about it, then that's where I really want to go. But we do have to wrap up in a little bit right now. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a few questions that you guys have asked from the live chat, and see how the guys or how Taki answers them. So the first one is from Kenji Stoll. How has traditional Japanese tattooing culture and motifs changed since you started tattooing? Has the technology of tattooing influenced that?
I don't think the technology of tattooing has really changed much. I think more like transmission of information has become faster. Like, people are sharing stuff. Like, I think things that people keep secret, people are sharing. Like I still try not to like I won't answer certain things online, because I feel like people need to experience things. People can't just like I'll get DMs from people like, what does this mean? And I feel like, you know, like, you can't, I'm not just gonna give you that answer. Like, you need to do some research. Like, you have to go read some books, you know, or maybe I'll point people in the right direction. But I think actually, like, the techniques, as far as like, you know, like it's sort of like with all tattooing, like, you know, our inks are better now. as far as like Tebori and hand tattooing, I think the stainless cartridges and just the way that people make their needles make it easier to keep them clean and sterilize them. But really, like the actual act of like hand tattooing hasn't changed. It's still the same motion that it's been for hundreds of years. But I think what's, like I said, what has changed the most is like just easy access to information. Like we're giving away a lot. Like even like I did a page for Mike Rubendahl's book, and his book that was talking about like the meanings of tattoos, and I did a bunch of lucky treasures. And I remember I had a tattooer friend of mine tell me like, no, don't put that in there, don't give it away, like because most people don't know what these treasures mean, like don't, and and I was a little bit torn about that, but I felt like, well, I felt like, like Mike's a good friend, so I wanted to do something cool. And I see these things tattooed a lot, and people don't know what they are, so I felt like, that's something I could share, but I think like that's one thing that I think maybe we've become a lot less guarded. I know when I first was in a tattoo family in 1998, a lot of the families in Japan didn't interact. And I think like now because of social media and just the changing of the generation, because I think people don't need to have those guards up as much. There's a lot more communication. So there's I think, and also too, like just like the way the world has shrunk, like, like when Horiyoshi took me as an apprentice, he also took Alex like that same year from Germany. You get like a whole bunch of people in LA, like Chris Brand, SB, and then they're doing the Horitsune style through Miyazo. So I think like because of the changing global nature and just the shrinking of the world, via email and text, like I used to fax Horiyoshi designs and have I used to send him a fax and he would like fix it and then fax it back to me. Like, and it's funny because you say fax and kids will be like, "What are you talking about? What is a fax machine?" You know what I mean? But this is before texting and Instagram and all that stuff.
Right.
Like so. But that's how you did it. And okay, to take it back to like the 70s, like Ed Hardy was saying, like, back then, if a Japanese tattoo master sent you a Polaroid, you would treasure it. Like that was gold, Yeah. Now nobody cares. It's all on social media, So I think that's what it is, like transmission of information. But I like to think, or at least I hope, that the core of Japanese tattooing, the culture, the spirituality just has stayed the same. And I don't think adding a few fancy inks or, like documenting it more will change that. And in fact, right now, Japan's going through this whole thing where, like a tattooer was recently arrested because he was tattooing without a medical practitioner's license. And there's this whole ruckus over there. But I personally think that Japanese tattooing is much larger than any of us. It's been this amazing tradition for hundreds of years. And like, I'll be damned if the government, I don't think the government will stomp it out. I think Japanese tattooing will continue to endure, and maybe in other ways, like even in the way of like, look at how many Japanese nationals are operating in America right now, and in Europe. So so it's spreading its wings, and so
that ties into the second one, which is done by Sperm Potato, which is an awesome name. What do you think can be / should be done with the barriers to tattooing in Japan by saying it's a medical procedure?
Well, it's tricky. I don't want to like talk out of line because I don't know exactly the legal case here. You know what I mean? Like, and that's one thing that's a pet peeve of mine. Like with anything, like everyone starts talking and they haven't even done the research, right? To my understanding, what happened was, so tattooing was illegal during the American occupation after World War II. One of Douglas MacArthur's aides saw some tattoos, was like, "Hey, this is art. This should be legal. We're Americans. We don't care." So it was legal. Everything was fine. Approximately 10 years ago, a law was placed mainly to go after like cosmetic tattooing, saying that basically to break skin and do art make, you had to have a medical practitioner's license, which is, I think, very similar to like in America, in certain states, you have to have an RN to operate a laser machine.
Yes.
Which I'm not saying is a bad idea. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's fine. Obviously, I don't think a medical practitioner's license is necessary for a tattoo. But so anyhow, that happened. But because the language was made it sound like they were basically regulating cosmetic tattooing, none of the tattoo community really like said anything. Now, a few years ago, they used that law to arrest a few people. But it's kind of hazy to me, like what the motivation of those arrests were, like if it was about tattooing or if it was about other stuff. People are bringing up the words like, like if maybe it had to do with tax evasion or other instances, because they haven't done like a widespread sweep. Like it's not like they've run into every tattoo shop and been like, we're arresting you. Like they've left a lot of people alone. But I think what's very troubling for all of us is that because they've done this law, at any time, in theory, they could run into your studio and shut you down.
Right.
So it's like they haven't done that. Like there's still tons of studios operating above ground. I think a lot of the traditional Japanese will just go underground.
Yeah.
And I've even heard some that are very defiant about it. Like, I remember I was told once by, a Japanese tattooer, like, well, you can be out there in the limelight, but I prefer to be in the shadows. And it's kind of funny because I remember Hardy told me a similar thing that Kuronuma had told him, that Japanese tattooing and all the cool stuff in Japan is in the shadows.
Yeah.
So I think there's still that thinking in Japan that, like, because this art form has been illegal so many times, but it's terrible for like let's say you're in Japan and you've spent $100,000 opening a business, and now you might be illegal. Like, I could see that being a very troubling thing.
Well, it's how they're trying.
I hope that they don't go anywhere with it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, but I do want to stress that I'm not completely educated on this subject.
Well, it's the same reason and way that they are trying to regulate America right now, where Oregon itself. Now you have to go to a tattoo school. A state mandate tattoo school become a tattoo artist. Joe Capobianco, Josh Bodwell, and a bunch of other artists over in the Pennsylvania area. I remember him and I had started talking about it as to where there needs to be some form of a union that sits in front of a board, because their board is becoming as strict as California or Florida, and they want to start settling the idea that if they want, remember when New York was mandating the ink pods, the state would make these specific inks and that they would have to be used and taxed and so forth. And, you got to log every needle and all this stuff. And the crazy thing is that under all these laws that they're trying to figure out, because from the medical side and point of view, they think that they're doing the greatest thing, but even on their end, they don't know what they're doing with the medical side. And they start going back and forth. It is extremely scary to think that if you do invest, as a business owner, myself as a business owner, you invest this money into a business that is also supposed to not feed your own family, but the family that you employ and that you have with you. And all of a sudden somebody busts in and says, hey, you know what? We're just taking you away. So I think it's also important. I mean, like you said, you don't have all the facts about this at the moment, but it is a good thing to talk about, because like the whole cultural thing earlier, having these discussions and open and understanding what's going on in your craft, in your industry, is very important, because you need to be somewhat active in it to at least make sure that it doesn't go further than what some people are trying to take advantage of.
And I can even speak, like I said, having stayed at Grace for 15 years. So basically, I've owned a tattoo shop before there was health department regulation in Santa Clara County in California. But pretty much everything they've asked us to do is either stuff we already did, or like it'll be like, because we already sterilize, we already keep a log of that. We already use single use. These are tattoo, because these are things we did to protect not just our clients but ourselves.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So I think, I think, and keep in mind, there's like, if you own a hair salon, to be honest, there's even more inspections, Yeah. So, I mean, I try to take it with a grain of salt. Like a lot of it, I think for us in California has been like paperwork, like, release forms and, just been keeping a lot of that stuff. But, or the stuff that they've asked me to do, I've been okay with, oh, we want you to have automatic soap dispensers and automatic towels. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. I mean, that makes sense. You don't want someone to touch it. Okay, fair enough. So, I mean, I think as long as it's reasonable, but I think like the one in Japan is a bit too much. Like,
of course.
What I mean? A medical practitioner license, really? What I mean? Like maybe some form of license, I understand that, but it's just too much. And, so we'll see what happens. But I guess the guy appealed the case right away. So it's going back to court.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it might still get overturned. Who knows?
Oh, let's hope. Last one comes from a Ricardo Gonzalez, which is the best way to. What's the best way to promote yourself in 2017?
The best way is to talk to X at Brushes of Doom and do a podcast with him. Okay, so this is how I feel. Is because like I said, we started tattooing when there wasn't Instagram. I was late to Instagram and Facebook. It's funny because my wife makes fun of me because when I was in college, I had a 25-page paper that crashed that I lost because my computer crashed. Right, and I had one of those little MacBook. If you remember the Mac Classics back then, you'll laugh. This is 1992 or something, right?
Blocks.
So yeah, I know. Like kids would be like, "Dude, what is that, Grandpa?" But anyhow, so I was late to Instagram, I was late to Facebook, and all these things because I just didn't really understand it. And even like I said, I barely just bought an iPad Pro yesterday. Mm-hmm. But I think like one thing I remember Horiyoshi told me when I first started apprenticing was he was like, "Don't worry about money. Don't worry about fame. Just make good tattoos. If you make good tattoos, the rest will sort itself out." And I'll be honest, like with State of Grace, we don't advertise. Mm-hmm. Like we just tattoo. And because to my feeling on that is like, if I do a good tattoo on you, you're gonna tell your friend, and it should go from there. Obviously, like I spend, anyone who follows my social media will know this. Like I spend like a good hour in the morning doing posts. Like I sit there, I drink my coffee. Like, I take my dog for a walk first, then I sit there drinking coffee and I do convention posts and I do shop posts. And for me, it's like everyone at the shop's busy, but I want to keep them that way. Like, I think one thing I want to say that I think like if you're a shop owner, your people should work hard, but you also have a responsibility to help them put food on their tables.
Yes.
So exactly. that means for me, like I want to promote my people. I want to keep a clean shop. We got, our supplies are stocked. Like, what I mean? Like you have a clean work environment. But I think definitely Instagram is the medium for tattooing because it's visual.
Yes.
Like more so than like Facebook, although I thought everyone was off Facebook, but you know what? A lot of people in Europe use Facebook still. Mm-hmm. We actually get a lot, like I know with the Momon Cats brand, Facebook, we get a lot of traffic through there. So, and I think what I would say is that like stuff like Facebook and Instagram, it's free. So if you're not using it, but I think just be honest. I know like when I see stuff like sponsored by or blah 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 and like too many hashtags, I lose interest because I feel like if someone's trying too hard, like if you're doing good tattoos, it's gonna show. Like it'll get out there. You know what I mean? Like just be yourself, be honest. Like I've found social media to be very helpful with our businesses, with our fundraisers. Like we're able to get the word out. But I think just like I don't know how to explain it. Like we're selling art here, so don't try too hard to sell yourself. You know what I mean? Like,
at the same time,
if you promote yourself too hard, then, like at the end of the day, like tattoos are art and they're supposed to be cool.
Yeah.
You got to be cool, right?
But like you said, if you focus on doing a great tattoo or doing great artwork, then the rest shall follow suit.
I think so. Yeah.
There are so many artists,
honest, though, because then you're not selling something that's just you.
Exactly.
You're not selling a product that's fake, and I think that's what it is. People can spot fake a mile away, Yeah. I mean, just be you. Just do you, bro.
Taki, thank you for all your time, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for talking about things that I feel that people need to know. Thank you for sharing your time in general. And I would like for you to share with anyone that doesn't know who you are or the convention or any of the books that you publish. Plug away, my friend.
No. Well, first off, thank you, X. I really appreciate it. Like, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, anytime for you, brother.
That's really cool of you. I know, basically, like, I own State of Grace Tattoo in San Jose, California. The main thing I would like to promote, though, is that we are the 13th annual Bay Area Tattoo Convention is October 20, 21, 22 at the SFO Hyatt Regency. And seriously, like, we have just killer artists. We're a purist convention. We don't have bands. We don't have pinup contests. We don't have tons of vendors. This is like straight just tattooing, So please come out and support the artists because, and I tell people this too, like, if tattooers like go to places and they don't get supported by the public, they're going to stop going, And for me, as a resident of the Bay Area, I like that all these talented artists come here. I love it. So let's show them a good time. I hope to see you there. Thanks again, X. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And for anyone that is looking to go to the convention or is curious about it, this convention is heavy hitter galore. The pupper. It's heavy hitter galore. There are amazing seminars there. Every booth, you're going to be impressed. Everyone from around the world. And like I said, it's something that if you really are curious about art, you're really curious about artists, then that is a place to go, just because it's just a pantheon of badasses. One last thing, Taki, one of the guys, his name is Mackenzie McCoy, actually a really great listener, says, can you please plug your Japanese rule book? I keep having trouble finding it. Thanks.
My what?
Your Japanese rule book?
What does that mean?
I have no clue. Oh,
is he still there?
I think he thinks. Are you talking about a movable, Mackenzie? You know, if you can do me a favor, Mackenzie, go ahead and DM Taki and ask him what book you're talking about, and he could help you out from there. Taki, my brother, thank you so much for making the time. Say hello to your wife for me. And as always, guys, if you are on iTunes or if you guys are on Android or mobile, you can download this for free. It is always for free. We are not going to charge anything. This is always just to get better and to learn. And yet again, if you need to find any more about Taki, we'll have it on BrushesofDoom.com. And thank you, Taki, again. Have a good night or day.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. No, no.